you know, new sensation. What else do I need to say? It's the third single off Kick. I think the band's fifth single. Everybody welcome Andrew Ferris from the legendary INXS.
Hi, guys.
Once again, although you're the keyboard player for the band, you play a lot of instruments, but you come up with the guitar riff that we just did an episode on Devil Inside. And I think it was a little clear to me that when you and Michael wrote, did you always write together, or sometimes did you just bring the music? Because it was more of an Elton John, Bernie Taupin kind of relationship, really, wasn't it?
I think that's a good analogy. That's an interesting way to look at it. I only ever met Bernie Taupin once in an elevator in Nashville, and ironically, it was on my way with my wife Marlena to go see Elton perform down at the Bridgestone Arena. And I tried to sort of talk to him, but I don't think he, was in that headspace. So I just left it alone. I just wanted to tell him I admire his lyrics. But I had met Elton many years before. Actually, I sat out on a street with Michael Hutchence and Elton John, out having a coffee with those two legends. And both those guys, well, and me, sat out there and we drank coffee, and we're in the middle of the public. And everyone's walking by, and I'm going, that's what I love about both these guys, is that they are real people. They're not hiding. They'll just sit out and talk to anybody. And because they do that, they're invisible. Yeah. Yeah. But the point is that, sorry, to get back to your point, is that I think, Michael never played a physical instrument. He really, he struggled with that, and that's cool. I think the closest he really came was playing a little bit of violin when we were teenagers in school, but he didn't have the, that burning thing in him to go learn an instrument. So his instrument in many ways, even before he was a singer, was his lyric writing. He always wrote, and very, very carefully, methodically wrote a lot of lyrics. And I noticed that about him when we were teenagers, is that was unusual. Most of the guys around me were either playing football or chasing girls around or whatever they were doing, getting into cars or motorbikes or whatever it was. They weren't sitting down writing complicated, concepts and things. And I picked up on that. And I used to sing in a band. And so when I realized that he did this lyric thing, that was our first getting together, because I was already had a band, I already was writing and playing music with my friends and my brothers or whatever. And I said to him, you should get more people to sing this stuff. It's really good, And then I said, why don't you even try singing? And he didn't want to do that at first. And I carry that legacy with me, not because it's like a badge of honor, but I also take that very seriously, because, he had a huge career, Michael. And, I God bless you, man, wherever you are. But I just want to say that, the way we worked was that a lot of the time, which may come as a real surprise to a lot of people, very similar to what you said, I guess, about Elton and Bernie Taupin, but we didn't often, smash it out in a room for hours together.
Right.
Michael was a very social kind of character. I mean, he had lots of friends in different walks of life, and had a lot of girls that were interested in him too, chasing him around everywhere. But we would get together and he'd say, what do you got? And I'd say, well, have a listen to this. And in those days, in the old days, it was like a cassette, or I might have an acoustic guitar or play it on a piano. And he'd say, well, what's that? And I'd say, well, this is what I'm working on. And he goes, love that. So just give me something to take away, and I'll bring a lyric back for you. And I said, cool. And that's often the way we worked. It was ridiculous. Like we
were playing him this groove for New Sensation?
Yeah, he heard that. And ironically, I'd actually written the music for New Sensation as early as, I think, end of 1982, around about 83. Yeah. And I'd written that, and it was, but from outer space compared to what was happening in 1982. Right. So I think, it wasn't ready, for whatever reason. And the record producer, Mark Opitz, who did another 3 of our big records for INXS, he said he nearly fainted. He said, do you mean to tell me that when I was producing this such and such a record, you already had that music? And I was like, yeah. And it's like, oh no, right? But it just wasn't, you know, it wasn't that time. And but
Right.
when we were putting the Kick album together, Michael and I knew, we both said, this piece of music's important. It suits what we're trying to do with the Needs You Tonight, you know, the What You Needs, and you know, New Sensation, all this sort of funk rock stuff. And yeah, it's got to be there. It's got to, and New Sensation's got a blues angle to it as well. It's got a, you know, this blues thing going through it, and it just worked. And Michael's lyrics, brilliant, absolutely brilliant.
And do I hear a banjo in the background?
Yeah, I played that on a keyboard. It's a sample.
It's a sample? Oh my God, I didn't even know that. I thought it's a damn good sample.
Well, yeah, well, I probably could have picked it on a banjo,
Yeah.
but the record producer, Chris Thomas, he was a real stickler for getting things, you know, smack on, you know, when we were, and lucky for us, he was like that. He wasn't loosey goosey, you know, whatever happens, man. He was like, no, this has got to be right, you know. And Chris Thomas's, you know, career, if you look up, anyone's interested looking up his career path, the record producer, his first job was working on the Beatles' White Album. That was his first job. Yeah. And so he brought us experience with him, you know, into what we were doing. And he was very, very, I don't know how to put the word, instinctual when he knew that we were onto something, whether, you know, it could be little subtle things, but he'd say, yeah, that's right. You keep doing that, or let's try this, or, you know, and he was a really good monitor for us as we were going along.
And it sounds to me like he knew how to work with the band, or with you and Michael in particular, because, you know, we sit in the music mill. The great Harold Shedd was the producer here. And I talked to him about it a lot. Sometimes he goes, my job was to completely dominate everything from start to finish. And he goes, sometimes it was to go in an entire album, hey, what about this? And I'm glad to hear that, because you guys were so creative. I think he gave you some affirmation. We've done different interviews before, Andrew, but I think I would be remiss if I don't ask you to recall what this was like from the mid to late 80s into the early 90s. INXS, it just never stopped. It never stopped, and it became global, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think, I don't know, but, you know, I'm sure anyone in any career path that, you know, at the end of Ghostbusters, where I think one of the original film, where someone says, look, whatever the worst thing is you can possibly imagine, don't imagine it. And it was the marshmallow
guy, right?
Walking down through Manhattan. Well, I often think that when you start something in life, and especially when you're younger and you're just full of beans and you know, you're on fire and the world's your oyster and all those kind of things. When you start these things and they start a momentum of their own and they start rushing forward, it's almost like they get loose from you, you know, like the whole thing starts just to stampede out somewhere else. And at that point, you ask yourself questions. You say, am I really, did we really have anything to do with this in the first place? Or is this something, you know, from above? I mean, what is going on here? You know, like it, and I felt, even though we had some very, very clever people working both within the band, you know, Michael, obviously, my two brothers, John on the drums and Tim on guitar, and Gary Beers on the bass, and Kurt Pengilly on the sax and vocals and guitar as well. And but the record producers, the engineers, the you know, the even the record labels, everyone started to get involved in what we were doing, and began to realize that this thing is successful, and including live promoters all around the world. We started playing the biggest stages in the world you could play. And after a while, you know, that's what I meant. You start looking at it, you go, what are we actually doing? You know?
Well, I'll tell you what I think you were doing, and I've never said this to you, Andrew. A lot of times music comes along and society adapts to that music. Elvis, early rock and roll, Beatles, soul, you know, with Motown. I think it was different with you guys. I think society had changed.
Yeah.
It was a rock and roll dance kind of visual thing. And I think you just happened to be a little ahead of that and then caught up with it. I think it was one of the few times ever it worked in reversed, and aren't we all richer for it, man? To this day,
Thank
and
you.
you said this in an earlier interview, every time an INXS song comes on, I love it, but it sounds current. And we've been through 20 different phases of music, yet somehow everything you did sounds now and relevant, in my opinion.
Interesting. Yeah, thank you. I mean, I would like to say that
You're humble, but I'm not wrong, am I? I mean, it stood the
well, no,
test of time.
I think you're right, but I'd like to give credit to Michael and to the record producers and also to our manager who passed away, that they would champion ideas that were at the time when we were doing things, you know, back in the 80s, we started working with hip hop remix people and you know, dance DJ people, you know, and a lot of people were like, "What are you doing?" And we're like, "Well, we don't know what we're doing, but that's the exciting part of it, is that it's supposed to be art. I mean, you got to let you." And I even used to, in this area, I had problems at first with it because I felt it was, I don't know what the word, you know, it was a bit radical at first, but then I'm a songwriter, and then I went, you know what, you know, this is probably really intelligent, because who knows where.
Well, you were probably wondering, well, does this go on the radio? When in fact,
yeah,
that's what radio needed next. Y'all were, you're either, usually most groups are too far ahead. You were just right, and society caught up with you guys, in my opinion. And I was there. I was part of it as a fan. And at least from my perspective, I know that to be true. So,
yeah.
Well, look, let's talk a little bit about this. Love this album cover. You've got a new single coming out from this, and tell us about it, Amber.
Sure. The new single, which is called "You Are My Rock," was a song that I wrote with a good friend of mine, Kieran Gribben. He's an Irish guy from County Derry in Northern Ireland, and he doesn't drink alcohol either. As an Irishman, that's quite
okay. That's
thing,
the
right?
first. Yeah.
But he's a brilliant writer. He's had a Grammy nomination for a song he put together for, I think, for Madonna. He's a very clever guy, and he happens to be a friend of mine. I met socially, believe it or not. We didn't meet through the music industry. I just met him one night, got to talking, and we were sitting around playing acoustic guitars at a friend's house on a cookout thing in Australia, and he started singing and playing. I was like, suddenly my attention was like boing, you know, because he's a great vocal and just one of those people. And so I said, let's write together. Let's do some writing. So we started writing. We wrote a bunch of songs together, and "You Are My Rock" is one of them. I'm really proud of it. It's coming out as a single, and you know, so far so good. I'm having a lot of interest in what I'm doing from people, and I've got an interesting bunch of people around me who want me to succeed. So let's hope it does. You know?
Well, the story behind this song is a series for the Tennessean, our paper of record here in Nashville, and a great newspaper. You are a regular visitor. What's your Nashville connection, Amber? That's how we met here.
That's true. That is how we met. Well, in that sense,
because, by the way, if we hadn't said it already, this is a virtual backdrop of your ranch in rural Australia, where you went to really value what's important in life. Another reason I love you, but so why Nashville again?
Well, the thing for me was, you know, I've always been a songwriter, and you know, I think it was even you or someone I know that was, you know, I think it was you, Bart, said it all begins with the song. You know, that was something that the NSAI, you guys, which is, I think, it's a fantastic organization.
That was a lady back here. You can't see it, Andrew. Maybe you can. That little guitar that you can barely see the neck of over here.
Right.
That was a lady that appeared on the Opry. She wasn't a member of the Opry, named Lorene Mann. And she was a volunteer receptionist for NSAI. And the late, great Francis Preston said, we're going to give you, the songwriters, a time to play at the DJ convention. What's your motto? We'll have one tomorrow. And Lorene came up with "It All Begins with a Song."
Yeah, well, she's right. You know, God bless Lorene. And I think, you know, so how I ended up in Nashville, first of all, I have family in Ohio, in Dayton area, and that's 5.5 hour drive to Nashville. And so for, my wife to see her family and for us to go to Nashville, it's not, a huge trip
Yeah.
really, compared to the distances in Australia are huge, to go see anybody. So that was good. That was one thing. Secondly, it's a music city. Always has
Yeah.
been. It's got incredible history. And it just like a magnet for like-minded people, artistic songwriting, brilliantly gifted musicians, producers, arrangers, great recording studios, people like yourselves that nurture and foster young, talented people. I mean, what a place. Why wouldn't you go
Yeah.
there, right? But beyond that, it was also for me personally, I heard, well, I could start to re-record some of my older demos. And like we've talked about this before, I have songs, sitting behind me in a trunk that I still never, recorded yet, that I've written some time ago. And they're like little creatures. And I sit and listen to them again later on. And I go, yeah, it's okay. I like this one. And then suddenly I'll go, it's time to let it out of the cage. And then I get it out and I dust it off and I have a relook at it. And maybe I'll change a bit of it. And I still work like that, But I think particularly with Nashville, when I got into town, I realized I could track a lot of my older demos. And that's how I ended up making my own Andrew Farris LP and an EP I've made too, but we're talking about the LP that's out now. And the LP is really a combination of me re-recording my old demos. And as I was going along, I thought, well, if I'm going to, pitch them as a songwriter to other artists or whatever, someone's got to sing them. And I've never considered myself much of a singer. So I said to the engineers in the studio, well, when I find a singer, I think that really suits the song, I'll get them to sing it. And they looked at me in this deadpan, they go, what's wrong with your voice? And I'm like, well, it's me. They're like, well, just sing it, So, and it was like that, honestly, that simple.
Yeah.
I just, okay. So I started singing, and they helped me. And I had other songwriters like Buck Johnson, who's been, touring with Aerosmith in Vegas and stuff, and James Dean Hicks, and these guys have become friends of mine. And they were like, no, come on, man, you got to do this. You got to sing, okay? And I'm like, yeah. And they're like, come on, And I want to thank them because, they're my friends, and I wouldn't be doing any of this without their support and encouragement.
Well, I want to thank you. Great songwriter, INXS, one of the great bands of all time. But I want to thank you for being my friend and reminding me we can always be better. I want to be a better man because of you.
Yeah.
New sensation, INXS, the great Andrew Farris, the story behind the song this week for the Tennessean and Tennessean.com.